Hello all, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com. I'm here today with a project update video for this 1/6 scale Armortek Panther Ausf.G. Since the last video update, before I could even start working on the tank, I really need to see and give the tank an overall inspection to see if the tank will run properly. To do this, I had to first pop the tracks, and I am now evaluating the suspension. Typically, I see if the bolts have been secured properly and if anything is in the up and up. So far, I see a possible issue. The model sprocket, it doesn't appear to be mounted correctly. The fact that there's this much play in the sprocket means it was probably not installed correctly. And also, if we notice, there is quite a substantial 1/16 of an inch gap between the final drive housing and the hull of the model. This should be a nice flush fit. Currently, I did not see this issue on the other side of the vehicle. Continuing with the inspection, the model's idler wheel spins nice and freely and doesn't have very much play, which is as per the kit. The model's bump stops over here are somewhat loose, and it's not too difficult to remedy. It's just a couple turns with an Allen wrench. Onward with the inspection, I will now inspect the road wheels. Now, the way you inspect the road wheels on the Armortek Panther and even their King Tiger is very interesting. The wheels are held by a single Allen screw that is covered up by the wheel detail. Now, what makes these wheels unique is that to get access to the Allen, you need to remove the hubcap. The hubcap itself is engineered so you just simply unscrew it like so. Once the cap is removed, you have access to the Allen. To test, I'm right now currently testing to see if the bolts are on with any type of thread lock. This is important because if the tank is driving, the bolts could unscrew themselves, which will cause some serious issues. Yeah, it looks like there was some thread lock used, but it's so old or there wasn't enough that the screw just totally came off. I will now remove all of the screws on these wheels to get further inspection to the model's torsion bars. Another area of interest that could be addressed is the way the torsion bars are assembled. On the Armortek model, the torsion bar simply is a bar of aluminum, and it threads into the axle as well as the torsion bar mount itself. Since it just threads in, there could be an issue where if the tank is driving, the axles can start unscrewing themselves like this here. If this happens, it's going to throw off the wheel alignment, which could also cause problems down the road. A simple fix to solve this is to drill a small hole through the torsion bar and the axle, and by inserting a small little pin. The small little pin will prevent any problems down the road. After removing the final drive assembly hub from the hull side, I found out that the reason why it was protruding outward was because there were these three bolts here that mount the motor to the side hull. These 4 screws, even though were not countersunk fully, and because of that there was a small little ridge that emerged from the hull. Because of that ridge, the final drive mount did not sit flush with the side of the hull. When the final drive did not sit flush with the side of the hull, the sprocket did not fit on properly to the unit. It's something like this a small little thing like not having the heads ground flush or even tapping the hole a little bit further, small little thing like that will trickle into having a serious problem happen. To make sure that the screws stay more flush, I went ahead with a countersunk bit on a drill, and I just drilled into the plate slightly. This small little removal of material will allow the bolts to sit flush. Also keep in mind is to protect the main drive gear over here from any fragmentation. Any fragmentation could cause problems down the road with the way the gears mesh. If you do have any fragmentation on it, it's simple to remove. Just hit it with a rag of paint thinner, and then you could hit it with an air compressor just to make sure the pieces are nice and clean. In addition to the bolts sticking up over the plate, another reason why the final drive wasn't sitting right was because the gear over here was interrupting and hitting the inside portion here of the final drive. To fix that problem, I went ahead with a milling machine and I milled away a portion here of the final drive to make this extra space for the gear tooth. With the metal now removed, the final drive sits nice and flush with the hull. Prior to reinstallation of the final drive to the hull, I applied a liberal amount of grease to the final drive gear. Now, in this condition, I am ready to reinstall the final drive to the hull permanently. To get an idea on how loose the bump stops were, here goes this set right here that I haven't got to yet. As you can see, there's quite a bit of play going on between the rubber bump stop and the bump stop mount. Luckily, it's an easy fix with the Allen wrench. And here goes the same set after the bolts have been tightened. As we can see, the rubber is still flexible and will still help out with the suspension, but the piece won't wobble or rattle apart when the model is driving. Just like with the other sprocket, the sprocket on the driver's side was also removed and double checked just to see if everything was okay. Upon removal of this sprocket here, the builder failed to really lubricate the gears. In fact, they were completely unlubricated whatsoever. After a quick smear of grease, all of the parts were remounted. Also, before the sprocket was remounted, I went ahead and permanently fixed the front fender here via fasteners. Just like the fender on the reverse side, it was only held on via adhesives. To solve this, I simply drilled 2 small holes into the bottom of the plate here and inserted the fasteners. Another thing that was modified was the way the headlight mounts into the hull. The builder ran the light as follows. He glued it to the top portion here of the fender, or of the mount, and then he had it run and enter the side here of the vehicle. The problem with this system and layout is not only is it inaccurate, but it's also very prone to damage, especially being so close to the track. Any type of obstructions or any type of foreign materials can easily snag the wire and thus cause damage. The hole on the real Panthers, the light actually entered into the hull via a small little mount that is positioned on the top portion here of the sponson. It's on the top portion and all the way towards the side of the hull. This way it is far from the track and it's nice and low to keep it from getting snagged from any obstructions. Also, what was changed was the way the final drives mount to the body. The builder followed the kit instructions that utilized small Allen screws in these 6 locations over here. However, on the real Panther, they were held on via hex bolts. When I was removing the unit, I simply swapped out the Allen bolts with the hex bolts, thus giving you a more realistic appearance. Just like what was mentioned on the previous side, while inserting the sprocket, I went ahead and also remounted the front fender that was cracked off earlier. As we recall, and as I mentioned earlier, the front fender was held on via an adhesive, which is why it broke off during transport. To mount the fender to the body, I simply did the same procedure I did on the other side. I drilled out 2 small locations and replaced them with metal fasteners. Like I mentioned in an earlier scene, the person that assembled the torsion bar did not lock the axles to the torsion bar swing arm. Because of this, the pieces could easily unscrew when the tank is in motion. As you can see here, the torsion bar itself is not moving, but rather the swing arm is. This looseness in the swing arm can cause a lot of problems. Namely, over here is that if the wheel hits a bump, and it'll go up and the wheel won't go back down. Another problem is that the weight of the tank is not being distributed properly through all the wheels because one wheel is not making contact with the ground. Now, because of that, all of the weight now is being redistributed to the other road wheels. And if the other road wheels have a similar problem with them, you could see how the problem can escalate quite quickly. To do the pinning, it's not very hard to do at all. What you got to do is first you got to make sure that all the axles are nice and mounted and screwed on tight to the swing arm. Once they are screwed on tight to the swing arm, you need to put the swing arm in a vise, and then with a center punch, you center punch out 2 small divots to where the pins are going to go. After the divots are made, on a drill press, you drill out completely all through the divots, making a nice hole that runs through the swing arm and through the axle. Once that's done, you are ready to take a pin, either steel or brass, insert it into the hole, and then by expanding the ends, the pin is permanently mounted to the swing arm assembly. Once this is done, the swing arm pieces will never have a chance on unscrewing while the model is in motion. Now with the torsion bar pinned, there's no risk of the pieces loosening up on you, and the torsion bar assembly now is ready to be reinstalled into the tank. Prior to reinstalling the piece into the model's hull, I take a quick smear of grease and smear it on to the torsion bar swing axle. After the grease is installed, the whole system, or the whole unit, is ready for installation. After the torsion bar gets installed, quick double check to see if it works. Passes the inspection, and now it's time to get to the next one. To avoid any confusion on which torsion bar goes where, it's best to do it one at a time with the pinning conversion. That way, there's no chance of you swapping one bar for another, because on these Armorteks, the torsion bars are not all the same. The 2 in the front and the 2 in the back are thicker than the ones in the middle. So just to save a bunch of headaches, it's best to do each conversion one at a time. While I rotated the tank on its belly, we can see that the builder did not paint the underhull with the base coat. He only left it with the primer. Also, as of note, the reverse side of the swing arms are also left in the barren metal. I will be painting over the lower chassis very soon. Also thing as of note, the reason why I rotated on its belly was because of these several gaps here on the sponsons. These gaps here are typical of the kit, and the way the kit is bent and cut and the way it's assembled, these holes are present. To plug these holes up, I will be plugging them up with 2-part epoxy, as well as this seam here running along the sponson and the upper hull. This seam here will be covered up with the same epoxy I will use to plug up the gaps, but also I will use to sculpt on the weld beads. After the weld beads were added, the weld beads as well as the swing arms themselves were hit again with the primer base coat, and then after the primer they were hit again with the Dunkelgelb. Here we can see the weld beads that were added. If we notice that towards the front and rear portion of the sponson plate, where those gaps were present, have been completely plugged up with the epoxy. Along the seam, the welds have been sculpted, as well as the missing welds have been sculpted along this side here of the hull. The previous builder did try to sculpt in welds on the reverse side, but he only did it to one side of the vehicle. In addition to adding the welds to the sponson, welds were also made to the track aligner, the idler mount. Welds were also added to the shock absorber end mounts. If we notice, the torsion bars have been protected with some masking tape. This is so that the steel portion of the axles are protected. You do not want to have paint covering these parts. Another thing as of note, the person who did the Zemerit on the model did not paint the underbelly of the model as what was seen before. Because of that, the Zemerit was only covered on the top part. This is a common issue with Zemerit, even on smaller scale models. If you do not paint the model completely and thoroughly, you will have gaps in the way the Zemerit is. This is because the Zemerit is a three-dimensional object and has lots of nooks and crannies. And if you only paint the model in one direction, or in one angle, you will miss a lot of the little nooks and crannies that is present with the Zemerit. Because I was able to flip the hull upside down, I was able to thoroughly paint the Zemerite coating on this model. While I have the model in this position, I can take advantage and add the missing hole that is supposed to be on this portion here of the final drive mount. On the real Panther, if we notice that there are only 5 mounting holes here. On the real Panther, there's actually 6. And then there are small little metal straps that keep the bolts from getting loose. I will be adding these details. Another detail as of note is that there's supposed to be a little weld bead across this piece of armor here that protects the final drive. On the Armortek model, it is held in place by a single hex head fastener. On the real tank, this fastener is not present and is only held on via the weld beads. To make the piece more prototypical, I will replace this hex bolt with a countersunk Allen screw. While I have the wheels off, I took the opportunity to go ahead and weather them. Once the wheels are mounted, on tanks like the Panther and on the Tiger One, it is very hard to get to all the spaces in the wheels. So while they were removed off the vehicle, I went ahead and added some of the airbrush weathering to them. Namely, I airbrushed the interior portion of the wheels as well as the rear portion of the wheels. For the inner road wheels, I went ahead and added their weathering as well. The inner road wheels are also a lot more difficult to get to on the Panther type tanks because of the interwoven wheel design. If we notice that the outer wheels of the vehicle have not been weathered yet, this is because these are the easiest wheels to weather. These wheels will be weathered after the model is painted. In addition to the airbrush weathering, the rubber tires have their worn weathering added via dry brush. Just like with the under area of the wheels, the model sponsons and lower hull has also got some basic airbrush weathering done to them. This is also because these areas will be very difficult to get to once the model is fully painted. The model will now have its hull flipped over again, and the road wheels will be remounted. With the hull now flipped over, it is now time to reinstall the model's road wheels. Just like the real Panther, to install the road wheels on the Armortek, you need to do it in layers, starting with first the outer wheel and then the inner wheels. Before the wheels were mounted, the entire axle was coated with grease. This way it aids in sliding the wheel onto the axle and also helps prevent rust from building up over time. One thing unique about the model's road wheels is that the road wheel itself has a rubber O-ring that helps seal the two wheels together. The O-ring itself is on the inner wheel a larger O-ring, and on the outer wheel it's facilitated with a smaller O-ring. Before I can mount the road wheels, the O-rings are tacked on with a small amount of super glue in 4 tiny little locations. This will make mounting the road wheel a lot easier because you don't have to worry about the O-ring slipping out. And here's the model with the road wheels added. The road wheels themselves mount seamlessly to the model and are very easily added. As we can see, they spin nice and freely and will roll very smoothly once the track is on. A few smaller details need to be made to the model's hubcaps. Once the hubcap mods are made, they will be installed and the model can then progress to the next step. Soon the model will be running, and once it will, I'll have another video update. And that concludes this project update video for this 1/6 scale Armortek Panther Ausf.G. If you like this video, stop by and like us on Facebook. Also, don't forget to check out eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 scale tank builds, as well as 1/6 scale detail components. Thank you.